Listening section directions. The listening section measures your ability to understand conversations and lectures in English. You will hear each conversation and lecture only one time. After each conversation or lecture, you will hear some questions about it. Answer the questions based on what the speakers state or imply. You may take notes while you listen. You may use your notes to help you answer the questions. In some questions, you will see this icon. This means that you will hear but not see part of the question. Some questions have special directions, which appear in a gray box. Most questions are worth 1 point. If a question is worth more than 1 point, the directions will indicate how many points you can receive. You will now begin the first part of the listening section. Questions 1 through 5. Listen to part of a conversation between two students.
How do you like your classes this semester?
Not bad, I guess. Thermodynamics is the hardest. It takes a long time for me to do the problems, and then I don't have enough time to do the reading for English and history. There just aren't enough hours in a day.
I hear you.
How are your classes?
Pretty good, actually. All of my professors are great, and I really like my discussion class in Russian history.
Oh yeah? How come?
Well, it's really useful to get a chance to talk about what Dr. Finley says in the lecture, and also hear what other people have to say. We have 2 really cool TAs who lead the discussions.
Oh yeah?
One guy is working on his doctorate in Russian studies, and he spent a year in Russia learning the language. He has this amazing ability to tie Dr. Finley's lectures to things that he's actually seen and experienced in Russia. He's a great storyteller. The other TA, Anna, her family is from Russia, and she also has great stories. But mostly I like her way of drawing everyone into the discussion.
That sounds great for you. But personally, I've never cared for discussion classes. I prefer the lecture format. I'd rather listen to my professor than to my classmates.
Really? I like the discussions because we can go beyond the lecture and the reading. Not that the lectures are boring or anything. I'm not saying that. What I mean is I get a lot out of the discussions. I think I learn more, when I get a chance to talk about Russian history. I certainly remember more of the details. And that sure helped me on the first test.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you like your class. So, are you still working in the pizza restaurant?
No, not enough time. I need a job, but the restaurant was getting to be too much time. Somebody was always asking me to take their shift, and I'd end up working 25 hours a week. I never had enough time to study.
Hey, I know just the job for you. There's a notice on the job board in the student center. I just saw it today. There's a job opening for host of the Graduate Student Lounge.
Oh, really? What does the host of the Graduate Student Lounge do?
Oh, I don't know. Make coffee and talk to people, stuff like that. But maybe you'd get a chance to do some reading during the quiet times.
I think that might be just the kind of job I could handle right now.
Number 1. What are the students discussing? Number 2. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Not bad, I guess. Thermodynamics is the hardest. It takes a long time for me to do the problems, and then I don't have enough time to do the reading for English and history. There just aren't enough hours in a day.
I hear you.
Why does the woman say this?
I hear you.
Number 3. Why does the woman like her Russian history class? Number 4. What is the man's attitude toward discussion classes? Number 5. What does the man suggest the woman do? Questions 6 through 11. Listen to part of a lecture in a botany class.
Several of the processes related to growth and aging in plants involve the effects of hormones. Today, I'll talk about two aging processes, the ripening of fruit and the falling of leaves in autumn. These processes involve a hormone called ethylene. What is ethylene? It's a chemical, a gas produced by plants as a hormone. Ethylene is unique among plant hormones because it's the only hormone that's a gas. The gaseous state is important because it enables ethylene to move through the plant. Like all other hormones, ethylene triggers certain responses in the plant. Ethylene is associated with a variety of aging processes. One example of the aging process is the ripening of fruit. The ripening of fruit involves several changes in structure and metabolism. Some of these changes are aging processes. One change is the weakening of cell walls, which softens the fruit. Another is the decrease in chlorophyll content, which causes the fruit to lose its greenness. Ethylene initiates or hastens both of these changes and also causes some ripened fruit to drop from the plant. A chain reaction occurs during ripening as ethylene triggers aging. The aging cells then release more ethylene. Because ethylene is a gas, the signal to ripen spreads from fruit to fruit. You've heard the expression, "One bad apple spoils the whole lot"? Well, it really is true. Yes, Randy?
So when we buy fruits like peaches that are still kind of green and we store them in a plastic bag and the peaches ripen faster, is this because of ethylene? I mean, I think I get it. The bag traps the ethylene gas and this speeds up the ripening.
Right. That's exactly what happens. Ethylene accumulates inside the plastic bag, and this starts a chain reaction. The signal to ripen spreads from one peach to another, and this causes all of the peaches to ripen faster. By the way, the role of ethylene was discovered in sort of an interesting way. A century ago, citrus growers used to ripen fruit by curing it in sheds that were heated by kerosene stoves. The growers thought it was the heat from the stoves that ripened the fruit. However, they later discovered that the fruit didn't ripen after they started using newer, cleaner-burning stoves. Botanists figured out that the reason the fruit ripened in the sheds with kerosene stoves was because of ethylene, not heat. Because, as it turns out, ethylene is a byproduct of kerosene combustion. Nowadays, a lot of fruit is ripened in huge storage containers that have ethylene gas piped in. It's a new variation on the old curing shed. But in other cases, storage facilities have to slow down the ripening caused by natural ethylene. For example, apples are stored in bins that are flushed with carbon dioxide. Circulating the air with carbon dioxide prevents ethylene from accumulating, and carbon dioxide slows down the action of whatever ethylene isn't flushed away. This is how apples can be stored for several months before they're shipped to supermarkets. Another aging process in plants where ethylene plays a role is the falling of leaves in autumn. When a leaf falls from a tree, the breaking point is a layer near the base of the leaf stalk. A change in the balance of two hormones, ethylene and auxin, controls the falling of leaves. An aging leaf produces less and less auxin, a hormone that stimulates cell growth. The drop in auxin makes the cells of the breaking layer more sensitive to ethylene. As the influence of ethylene becomes stronger, the cells start producing enzymes that weaken the cell walls of the breaking layer. Finally, with the help of wind or rain, the leaf breaks away at that layer and falls from the tree.
Number 6. What is the lecture mainly about? Number 7. According to the professor, how is ethylene unique? Number 8. According to the lecture, what are two effects of ethylene? Number 9. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
A chain reaction occurs during ripening as ethylene triggers aging. The aging cells then release more ethylene. Because ethylene is a gas, the signal to ripen spreads from fruit to fruit. You've heard the expression, "One bad apple spoils the whole lot." Well, it really is true.
Why does the professor say this?
One bad apple spoils the whole lot?
Number 10. Based on the information in the lecture, indicate whether each process below is related to the hormone ethylene. Number 11. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
An aging leaf produces less and less auxin, a hormone that stimulates cell growth. The drop in auxin makes the cells of the breaking layer more sensitive to ethylene. As the influence of ethylene becomes stronger, the cells start producing enzymes that weaken the cell walls of the breaking layer. Finally, with the help of wind or rain, the leaf breaks away at that layer and falls from the tree.
What does the professor imply about the falling of leaves? Questions 12 through 17. Listen to part of a discussion in a business class.
Managers must manage. It's a simple statement, but let's think about what it means for a minute. Let's ask ourselves, what makes a manager? Tammy?
A manager is someone who supervises other people and plans and carries out projects.
That's right. A manager has the ability to set goals and then to accomplish what he or she sets out to do. Business managers shoot for results. This means that once you set your business plan and budget for the year, you have to achieve the sales, the market share, the earnings, whatever you set out to do. Yes, Doug?
But even the best managers can't achieve every goal. A lot can go wrong that's beyond your control. Say, for example, the whole economy goes into recession. That would interfere with your goals. Like your sales, for example. Sometimes things go wrong no matter what you do.
You could say that about life in general. We're always being hit with things that are beyond our control. But good managers have to adjust to changing circumstances. They have to... But let me tell a story I tell all my students. It's about two promising young people of equal intelligence and ability. Both are college students, and both want to go on to a top graduate school of business. The first student, May, hands in all of her assignments and does exactly what's expected of her. She receives good grades, mostly A's with a few B's, during her first couple of years in college. But then one year she gets the flu before final exams, and she performs poorly on her exams. As a result, her grade point average slips to just above a C. May tells herself that it wasn't her fault. It was because she wasn't able to study when she was sick, and she vows to do better next year. But something always happens to wreck May's plans. Next year, she misunderstands a question on the final and gets a C. May graduates with a B- average. The second student, Kay, also wants to go to a top school, so she sets out to get an A average. She studies 4 hours every night. Her diligence and hard work pay off, and she gets all A's her first 3 years. Then, in her senior year, she runs into trouble with one of her courses, advanced accounting. She works hard, but the material is difficult, and she has a hard time solving some of the problems. At midterm, she's struggling for a B. She works harder, does some outside reading. She asks her professor for help, but the professor doesn't have much time for students. What does Kay do? After trying several different approaches, studying harder, reading more, asking for help, what she ends up doing is finding a graduate student to tutor her. She works long and thinks hard. And of course, you know the end of the story. Kay gets her A. Now, what kind of manager is each student?
Kay is certainly a more successful student because she got all A's.
The first student, May, probably won't get into a top business school because the top schools require you to have a high grade point average, and she didn't have that. So the other student, Kay, has a better chance of getting a top-notch business education.
What you both said is true, but who's the better manager, May or Kay?
In my opinion, May wouldn't be a strong manager. She just drifted along. When she got the flu and blew it on her exams, she never really caught up. Kay is clearly the better manager.
I agree with Tammy. I think Kay will be a better manager. She graduated with an A average, so that shows how hard she worked. But she also knew what to do when she was having trouble in her accounting course.
Kay was a manager before she even reached business school. She had grasped the essentials of good business management, not because she worked so hard, but because when one action failed, she tried another and another until she achieved her goal. That is what managers do.
Number 12. According to the discussion, what are the characteristics of a good manager? Number 13. Why does the professor tell a story about May and Kay? Number 14. What does the professor imply about the student named May? Number 15. In the story, what point does Kay illustrate? Number 16. Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
Now, what kind of manager is each student?
Kay is certainly a more successful student because she got all A's.
The first student, May, probably won't get into a top business school because the top schools require you to have a high grade point average, and she didn't have that. So the other student, Kay, has a better chance of getting a top-notch business education.
What you both said is true, but who's the better manager, May or Kay?
Why does the professor ask this?
But who's the better manager, May or Kay?
Number 17. What does the professor mean by this statement?
Kay was a manager before she even reached business school.
Questions 18 through 22. Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Excuse me, Dr. Phillips?
Hello, Patrick. I got your message. You said something about a project you're working on.
Yeah, that's right. Student activities are trying to find out what students think about the different events we sponsor. So I'm designing a study for them, and I was wondering if I can get your advice.
Sure. So, what can I do for you?
Well, like I said, we want to find out what students like and don't like about our events, like the concerts we have, the masquerade ball, the spring picnic, and so on. I know there's lots of ways we can get information like this, information from students, but I'm not sure which way is best. I like to get as much feedback as possible, from as many people as possible. But, like I said, I'm not sure about the best way to do it. Interviewing students might be a good way, but I think interviews would take a lot of time.
You're right about that. Face-to-face interviews are very time-consuming. Two other methods you could use are the survey and the poll. A survey can be highly structured and doesn't require a face-to-face situation, so that's an advantage. You could do a survey in the form of a printed questionnaire, or you could also do it over the telephone. Telephone surveys take more time.
I see what you mean. For our purpose, a printed survey might be best, but you also mentioned a poll. How's that different from a survey?
A survey is usually fairly structured, while a poll is much simpler in design. A poll is simply a head count. The respondents are presented with a limited number of options. Are you for or against a masquerade ball? Do you prefer events like A, B, or C?
I see. So a poll probably wouldn't give us a lot to go on, but we could probably reach more people that way.
That's right. You know, there's an excellent book that explains the pluses and minuses of each of these methods. It's called How to Measure Attitudes, and it's in our library. And probably the bookstore as well, because it's used in some of our graduate courses. It shows you how to word questions to get the information you want, and there are lots of good samples of surveys.
I better write this down. How to measure attitudes.
I'd lend you my copy, but one of my assistants is using it.
Oh, that's all right. I'm sure I can get a hold of it. If we decide to go with the printed survey, would you be willing to look at my draft first?
Of course. You could just slip it into my mailbox or stop by any time during my office hours.
Okay. That would be great. I'll put the draft in your mailbox. Thanks. I really appreciate your time. Now I better get going and see if I can find that book.
Okay, Patrick. Good luck.
Number 18. Why does the student speak to the professor? Number 19. What kind of information does the student want to obtain? Number 20. According to the professor, what is one advantage of a survey? Number 21. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
A survey is usually fairly structured, while a poll is much simpler in design. A poll is simply a head count. The respondents are presented with a limited number of options. Are you for or against a masquerade ball? Do you prefer events like A, B, or C?
Why does the professor ask this?
Are you for or against a masquerade ball? Do you prefer events like A, B, or C?
Number 22. How does the professor help the student? Questions 23 through 28. Listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class. The professor is talking about adulthood.
We all change over the course of our adulthood. Some changes we go through are biological and are a natural part of aging. Some are cultural experiences, such as the changes related to our family life. A lot of the changes in adulthood involve social relationships and responsibilities. And then there are some changes that are more internal and personal. Question?
Yes. Is what you're talking about, I mean these changes we experience, are they part of our biological clock?
I'm glad you brought up the biological clock. The term biological clock refers to the biological and chemical changes that occur with aging, as if a clock were ticking away in the background. Some changes in adults are biological. These changes are often easy to observe, like my hair turning gray. Some biological changes aren't directly visible, such as the reduced efficiency of the neural connections in our brain. But some of the changes we go through have more to do with sociology than biology. There's also a social clock that defines the sequence of normal life experiences, such as the timing of education, career, marriage, and so on. Virtually all societies are organized into age strata, periods in life with norms for, that is, typical expectations, demands, social roles, and responsibilities. People have different expectations of and different attitudes toward 20-year-olds, 40-year-olds, and 70-year-olds. We generally expect a 20-year-old to act in a certain way, but we expect different behavior from someone who's 40 or 70. Our attitudes towards each age group form what we consider to be the age norms for that group.
Excuse me, Dr. Butler? Wouldn't these age norms be different in different cultures? I mean, in some cultures, someone who's 40 is considered old, but in other cultures, 40 is still kind of young.
Various cultures might define old and young differently, but every culture has a set of attitudes, age norms, for old people and a different set of attitudes for young people. For example, an older adult might be seen as having more or less status than a young adult, no matter how the culture defines what age is old. Early adulthood is the period from age 18 to 40. Early adulthood is when more new social roles are acquired than at any other time of life. The first new role is often independent adulthood, as the young person leaves home. Another new role is worker, as the young adult begins a career. Young adults also acquire the role of spouse, as most first marriages occur during early adulthood. A major new role is that of parent. Over 80% of adults in North America will eventually become parents, normally in their 20s or 30s. The second stage of adulthood, middle adulthood, is roughly from age 40 to 65. In middle adulthood, the same social roles are still present, spouse, parent, worker, but they become less demanding and less confining than they were during early adulthood. A few new roles are added, like grandparent, or maybe caregiver to our own aging parents. This is the sandwich generation, because people in middle adulthood are sandwiched between the needs of their children and the needs of their aging parents. Late adulthood begins at age 65. Late adulthood is normally marked by a decline in the number of social roles. The role of worker is shed at retirement. The older adult is still a parent, but that role now has fewer duties. For many people, the role of spouse is given up to widowhood. Yes?
So far, you've been talking about people who have children. What about people who don't have children?
Adults who don't have children don't experience the role changes that accompany a child's development. Yet their experiences do not otherwise differ in any substantial way. They follow the basic pattern of adulthood. By this I mean they add new roles in early adulthood, change roles in middle adulthood, and shed roles in late adulthood.
Number 23. What aspect of adulthood does the professor mainly discuss? Number 24. Why does the professor discuss the biological clock? Number 25. Why does the professor say this?
People have different expectations of and different attitudes toward 20-year-olds, 40-year-olds, and 70-year-olds. We generally expect a 20-year-old to act in a certain way, but we expect different behavior from someone who's 40 or 70.
Number 26. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Various cultures might define old and young differently, but every culture has a set of attitudes, age norms, for old people and a different set of attitudes for young people. For example, an older adult might be seen as having more or less status than a young adult, no matter how the culture defines what age is old.
What does the professor imply about age norms? Number 27. Based on the information in the lecture, indicate whether each sentence below characterizes early adulthood, middle adulthood, or late adulthood. Number 28. What does the professor say about people who do not have children? Questions 29 through 34. Listen to part of a lecture in a music history class. The professor is talking about Baroque music.
The term Baroque refers to a style and a culture rather than a precise period in history. Architecture, painting, and music each have a style called Baroque. One of the most striking features of the Baroque style is its expressiveness. Baroque music is a vigorous style, combining imagination with great feeling. There's great use of dissonance to express extremes of emotion, especially in vocal music. And compared to Renaissance music, Baroque music has more ornament. Trills and grace notes, little twists on notes, all find their way into musical notation. Baroque music is known for its virtuoso instrumental music. Instrumental music had been gaining in importance and came into its own around 1600. Music was freed from the necessity of words, and it now moved to dance rhythms rather than speech rhythms. The new style demanded new musical forms. It was in the Baroque era that some of the forms we know today began to take shape: the opera, the sonata, and the concerto. The person generally given credit for inaugurating the Baroque style was Claudio Monteverdi. Monteverdi's career took place at the same time as other developments like the rise of solo singing and experiments to recreate Greek music and drama. These experiments led to a new form called opera. Monteverdi was the first of the great Italian opera composers, and he was also the first to explore the tone colors of the orchestra. Monteverdi was a revolutionary. He took musical risks, like doing exciting things with rhythms and using dissonance to make the music more expressive. The golden age of Baroque instrumental music began with orchestral combinations, like the one Monteverdi used in his opera Orfeo. The orchestra for Orfeo consisted of 2 harpsichords, 2 contrabasses, 12 members of the violin family, a double harp, 2 pipe organs, 4 trombones, 2 cornets, a small flute, 3 muted trumpets, and an assortment of other instruments. With these instruments, Monteverdi told the Greek legend of Orpheus. The instruments dramatized the story's characters and plot. For example, the high flute and a small violin accompanied the shepherd. Brasses and organ music suggested the underworld, and so forth. Orfeo was full of expressive devices and demanded masterful playing from strings and brass, as well as virtuoso singing.
Excuse me, Professor Stevens, could you explain exactly what virtuoso means?
Sure. Virtuoso is an Italian word. It means highly skilled or worthy. A virtuoso piece of music requires a highly skilled vocalist or a masterful player.
But a person can be a virtuoso, right? I mean, we can say, for example, he's a real virtuoso.
Yes, that's right. A virtuoso is a musician who plays with great skill and technique, or who has an extraordinary individual style. It was the violin virtuosos who perfected new forms of instrumental music in the Baroque period. All of the great violin makers of the time were concentrated in Italy. The terms concerto and sonata also come from Italian. The concerto and the sonata developed as vehicles for virtuoso musicians to show off their skills. The concerto became the dominant instrumental form of the Baroque period. Concertos feature solo instruments, usually violins, and orchestra, or they can feature groups of instruments and orchestra. The music is characterized by its dazzling virtuosity and ornamentation. Baroque concertos required a lot of technical skill in both the composing and the performing. The most famous of all Baroque concertos were for solo violin and orchestra. Vivaldi's Four Seasons are probably the best-known examples. The Four Seasons are 4 related concertos, one for each season. They are pure, quintessential Baroque music, descriptive, expressive, elaborate, and with virtuoso violin playing. Before I go on, let's pause here so we can listen to the first of the 4 seasons. Here is Concerto Number 1, Spring.
Number 29. How does the professor develop the topic of Baroque music? Number 30. What characterizes Baroque music? Number 31. Why does the professor say this?
Instrumental music had been gaining in importance and came into its own around 1600. Music was freed from the necessity of words, and it now moved to dance rhythms rather than speech rhythms. The new style demanded new musical forms. It was in the Baroque era that some of the forms we know today began to take shape: the opera, the sonata, and the concerto.
Number 32. Why does the professor discuss the instruments of the orchestra for Monteverdi's opera Orfeo? Number 33. What does the professor mean when she says this?
The concerto and the sonata developed as vehicles for virtuoso musicians to show off their skills.
Number 34. What is the professor's opinion of the concertos called the Four Seasons? Questions 35 through 39. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a professor.
Professor Beckman, do you have a minute?
Sure. What can I do for you, Amelia?
Well, I've decided to apply to the teacher certification program, and I wondered, I'd like it if you would recommend me for the program.
Oh, so you want to be a teacher. Good, good. Glad to hear it. What level do you want to teach?
Actually, grades 6 to 8 interest me the most. I loved school, especially science, when I was that age.
Good. Glad to hear it. I have a strong sense that you'll be a dedicated teacher. Now, you say you need a letter from me.
Yes. Would you be able to do that?
Of course, I'd be happy to. But tell me more about your decision to teach and why you think you'll be good at it.
All right. Well, let's see. I guess I've known for a long time that I wanted to be a teacher, ever since I was in 6th grade myself. I've loved science when I was a kid, still love science, and I guess I want to share my love of science with kids. I've worked with kids before as a camp counselor for 2 summers, teaching nature classes and leading nature hikes and stuff like that. And I just had so much fun with the kids. I think I'm a pretty good counselor, and I love being in the woods myself.
Now remind me, because I tend to forget these things. You were in my human development course. Is that right?
Yes, and also general psychology in my freshman year.
Right, good. I'm trying to get a handle on this. I recall that your presentation in human development was very well thought of by your classmates. You did a study of adolescence. Is that right?
Yes, I talked about identity and role confusion, and I looked at 2 groups of kids, one 11 and the other 15 years old.
Right. You showed slides of the children's artwork.
That's right. They did self-portraits. It was interesting, too, because in a lot of ways, the younger kids were more expressive and more positive in their image of themselves. The older kids' art was more sophisticated technically, but in a lot of ways it was darker, even in the colors they used.
Yes, I recall. Your report was very well done. I remember it well, and I'll mention it in my letter. So, when is it that you need this?
My entire application is due on March 15th. There's a form for you to use. Here. You send it directly to the Dean of the School of Education.
Right. I know these forms. You can just leave it with me. I'll fill it out and see that it gets there on time.
Thanks. I really appreciate your help.
And I'm happy to help.
Number 35. What is the main purpose of the conversation? Number 36. Why does the student want to be a teacher? Number 37. Why does the student talk about being a camp counselor? Number 38. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Now remind me, because I tend to forget these things. You were in my human development course. Is that right?
Yes, and also general psychology in my freshman year.
Right, good. I'm trying to get a handle on this.
Why does the professor say this?
I'm trying to get a handle on this.
Number 39. What will the professor probably include in the form that he fills out? Questions 40 through 45. Listen to part of a lecture in an ecology class.
Several 100 million years ago, a large body of water covered Manitoba. This ancient ocean was home to brachiopods, trilobites, and corals. As these organisms died, they settled in layers on the ocean floor, where they became compressed and cemented together, and over millions of years turned into limestone. Wherever you find limestone, you also find crevices, tunnels, and caves. A network of caves is formed when acidic rainwater seeps into the layers of limestone through cracks at the surface and dissolves some of the limestone. The limestone weakens and collapses near the surface and further below, creating sinkholes or large pits in the limestone. The limestone pits in Manitoba's Interlake region are like nothing else in the world. What makes these particular pits so unique? Well, for one thing, huge numbers of snakes migrate to these holes in the ground. If you go anywhere near the pits in the spring or fall, you'll find the region alive with thousands of red-sided garter snakes. This is the world's largest concentration of snakes. Tens of thousands of these snakes congregate at the surface of their winter dens each year. They emerge in the spring after spending the winter hibernating in what are known as the snake pits. In the fall, the snakes return to the pits to prepare for winter. And why are snakes drawn to the limestone pits? Well, the availability of winter dens in the limestone bedrock makes this sort of an ideal home. Like all reptiles, snakes are ectotherms. This means they warm their bodies mainly by absorbing heat from their environment. The pits are the perfect location for the hibernating snakes because they shelter the snakes from winter temperatures that sometimes dip as low as minus 40 degrees Celsius. Animals interact with their environment in a number of ways. For example, by responding behaviorally or physiologically, or by adapting over evolutionary time. The migration of garter snakes to the limestone pits is an example of a behavioral mechanism for dealing with seasonal variations in temperature. Moving to a new location is an animal's quickest response to an unfavorable change in the environment. By gathering in a mass below the frost line, the snakes are able to survive the harsh prairie winter. Garter snakes have an optimal temperature for physiological function. They can, however, actually survive freezing temperatures for a short time, a few hours only, and at temperatures like -1 or -2 Celsius. They obviously can't stay frozen all winter long, but to survive in cold climates, they've adapted to situations like being exposed to freezing temperatures outside their dens on cold nights in the spring or fall. This ability to endure short freezes will get them through till morning. The beginning of freezing in their bodies is a physiological response that serves as a signal to the snakes. Freezing tells them to alter their behavior, to move and find a warmer place. This physiological behavioral response might also be helpful in their winter dens because if the den temperature falls too low and some snakes begin to freeze, it could be a signal for all the snakes to move to deeper, warmer parts of the den. These response mechanisms are only marginal abilities that allow the snakes to cope with short-term freezes. About 10 years ago, thousands of snakes died when they were trapped in shallower dens when the frost line fell during an extended period of freezing temperatures. They were apparently not able to get to lower depths in time.
Number 40. What is the main purpose of the lecture? Number 41. What natural features of Manitoba does the professor discuss? Number 42. Why does the professor say this?
Well, the availability of winter dens in the limestone bedrock makes this sort of an ideal home.
Number 43. How do the garter snakes deal with seasonal variations in temperature? Number 44. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
They obviously can't stay frozen all winter long, but to survive in cold climates, they've adapted to situations like being exposed to freezing temperatures outside their dens on cold nights in the spring or fall. This ability to endure short freezes will get them through till morning.
What does the professor mean when he says this?
This ability to endure short freezes will get them through till morning.
Number 45. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
The beginning of freezing in their bodies is a physiological response that serves as a signal to the snakes. Freezing tells them to alter their behavior, to move and find a warmer place. This physiological behavioral response might also be helpful in their winter dens, because if the den temperature falls too low and some snakes begin to freeze, it could be a signal for all the snakes to move to deeper, warmer parts of the den.
What does the professor imply about the behavior of the snakes? Questions 46 through 51. Listen to part of a lecture in an architecture class. The professor is talking about the arch.
An arch is the spanning of a wall opening by means of separate units, such as bricks or blocks, which are assembled into an upward curve. The invention of the arch made it possible to span wide openings without large timbers. Before the arch, large window and door openings required a large wooden timber and a supply of large trees. The arch was very important in regions where there were few large trees. The Babylonians, Egyptians, and Etruscans all used the arch, and it was later adopted by the Romans. The arch became a basic principle in the Roman system of construction in brick and concrete. The Romans contributed a lot to the development of architecture, especially its engineering aspects. They perfected a system of arch and vault construction. As a result, a larger variety of buildings appeared, each with a form suited to its function. The Roman approach to the building arts was always practical. The Romans undertook huge public work projects, including a network of bridges and aqueducts, all of which utilized the arch. To supply their vast public baths and fill the water needs of their citizens, they needed water in large amounts for their cities. Using their considerable engineering skills, the Romans built aqueducts so sturdy that many are still standing. The Roman semicircular arch is the most common and most elementary type of arch. It was made by taking wedge-shaped blocks, large bricks with angled sides, and placing them side by side, forming an upward, curving, semicircular opening. The block at the highest point, the center of the arch, is called the keystone. The keystone is the most important block because it holds the other blocks in place. The keystone locks the other stones together. The round arch is extremely strong and stable. It's primarily the wedge shape of the blocks that give the arch its stability. The wedge-shaped blocks are locked together tightly, transferring their weight downward on either side. The arch is very sturdy and can support a heavy load. The arch is supported only from the sides. This is because of lateral thrust. The downward pressure is transformed into lateral thrust through the piers, the two vertical structures on either side of the opening. What I mean is, the weight of the arch and its load is converted from downward pressure into sideways, lateral pressure. The massive piers that frame each side of the opening receive the pressure and therefore support the arch. Until the 19th century, arches were still widely used in public buildings in North America. However, the invention of steel beams in the 19th century... Yes? Did you have a question?
Yes, I was wondering, what you said implies that we don't see arches in public buildings anymore. I mean, in newer buildings. But what about the arches in our administration building here on campus? It has lots of arches, and I'm pretty sure the building is fairly new.
I'm glad you mentioned our administration building because that's a perfect illustration of the decorative arch. You see, behind all that beautiful brickwork is a system of steel beams. The beams are doing the real work of holding up the building. The brick arches are just for show. Steel beams for wide spans have reduced the arch to a mostly decorative function, and as you can see in our administration building, decorative arches remain popular today.
Number 46. According to the professor, why was the arch an important development in architecture? Number 47. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
The Romans undertook huge public work projects, including a network of bridges and aqueducts, all of which utilized the arch. To supply their vast public baths and fill the water needs of their citizens, they needed water in large amounts for their cities. Using their considerable engineering skills, the Romans built aqueducts so sturdy that many are still standing.
What does the professor imply about the public works projects of the Romans? Number 48. Identify the keystone in the drawing of the arch. Number 49. What reason is given for the stability of the arch? Number 50. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
The downward pressure is transformed into lateral thrust through the piers, the two vertical structures on either side of the opening. What I mean is, the weight of the arch and its load is converted from downward pressure into sideways, lateral pressure.
Why does the professor say this?
What I mean is, the weight of the arch and its load is converted from downward pressure into sideways, lateral pressure.
Number 51. According to the professor, why are arches that are built today mostly decorative in function? Speaking section directions. The speaking section measures your ability to speak in English about a variety of topics. There are 6 questions in this section. Questions 1 and 2 are independent tasks in which you will speak about familiar topics. Your responses will be scored on your ability to speak clearly and coherently about the topics. Questions 3 and 4 are integrated speaking tasks. You will read a passage, listen to a conversation or lecture, and then speak in response to a question about what you have read and heard. You will need to combine relevant information from the 2 sources to answer the question completely. Your responses will be scored on your ability to speak clearly and coherently and on your ability to accurately convey information about what you read and heard. Questions 5 and 6 are integrated speaking tasks. You will listen to part of a conversation or lecture and then speak in response to a question about what you have heard. Your responses will be scored on your ability to speak clearly and coherently, and on your ability to accurately convey information about what you heard. You will hear each conversation and lecture only one time. You may take notes while you listen. You may use your notes to help you answer the questions. What is your most valuable possession? Describe it and explain why it is important to you. Include details and examples to support your explanation. Some universities focus on having excellent libraries, laboratories, and other facilities. Others focus more on hiring the most successful and qualified professors. Which system do you think benefits students more, and why? Include details and examples in your explanation. Now listen to two students as they discuss the job of resident assistant.
I think I'll apply for resident assistant. The cost of campus housing is going up again. I'd sure like to live on campus for free and in a private room.
Are you sure about that? It may not be what it seems.
A private room with no rent? How could you go wrong with that?
I only know what my friend told me. She was an RA last year, and she said it took up a lot more of her time than she thought it would. It's that part about managing routine problems of residents. She said there were people knocking on her door at all hours of the day with all kinds of problems, feeling homesick, complaining about their roommates, things like that. It was impossible for her to study in her room because there were so many interruptions.
No kidding. It was really like that?
That's what my friend said. The stress of being an RA really affected her schoolwork, too. She even had to drop a course because she couldn't keep up.
Wow.
And I'm suspicious about the job description. You know, the part where it says that RAs have other related duties. You never know what that means. It could mean almost anything. I mean, what will they make you do for free rent?
The woman expresses her opinion about being a resident assistant. State her opinion and explain the reasons she gives for holding that opinion. Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in a geology class.
By studying patterns of glaciation, we've known for a long time that climate change has happened in regular cycles. But more recent research tells us that climate change is not always gradual. Ice cores drilled from glaciers in Greenland challenge the theories about long, gradual cycles of climate change. The ice cores are evidence of a sort of flickering climate, sudden swings from warm to cold and back again. The fact that these changes took place so quickly tells us that our climate is not as stable as we used to think. The layers in the ice tell the history of climate change. They show us a period of global warming about 11,000 years ago. This warming took several decades, but was also marked by several sudden jumps in warming that each took less than 5 years. About half of the warming was concentrated in a single period of less than 15 years. This is very rapid climate change. Researchers studying the ice cores have concluded that during our latest ice age, the climate might have fluctuated wildly. Average annual temperatures may have risen several degrees in only a few years, only to slide back into sort of a deep chill again, an ice age that lasted thousands of years. Furthermore, the change from the latest ice age to the present warm period might have taken less than a human lifetime, not the thousands of years of gradual warming that most scientists once believed.
The professor discusses studies of the ice in Greenland. Explain how this research has advanced our understanding of past climate change. Now listen to a conversation between two students.
Hey, Michael, how's it going?
Okay, I guess. But I just found out the bus company is changing their schedule, and they're canceling the bus that goes to my neighborhood. That means I won't be able to take the bus to campus anymore.
Oh, that's too bad. What are you going to do?
I don't know yet. I need to figure out some way to get to school after the end of the month. I don't have a car and I live too far away to walk.
What about carpooling with another student? There must be someone who lives near you that drives to school. Have you checked the ride board?
No, what ride board?
There's a big bulletin board in the student center, outside the cafeteria. It has a big map of the city, and there are places where people who drive can advertise for riders, and where people who need rides can look for people to carpool with. You should check it out. You could put your name up in a place where it lists people looking for rides. Maybe you'll find someone.
Oh, yeah? I wonder.
Oh, another thing. Have you ever thought about moving closer to campus? I mean, I share an apartment with roommates that's just 5 blocks away. It's great, 'cause I can walk to campus.
I don't know. I like where I live now, and moving is a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Well, I hope you can figure out something. Good luck.
Thanks.
The students discuss 2 possible solutions to the man's problem. Describe the problem. Then state which of the 2 solutions you prefer and explain why. Now listen to an instructor talk about 2 methods of food preservation.
All foods will eventually spoil if they're not preserved. Food preservation is the process of preventing or slowing the natural decay of edible plants and animals, spoilage that results from microorganisms, bacteria, molds, and yeasts that are present in the food. The most natural method of preserving food is drying. Nature preserves the seeds for next year's crop by drying the outer layers of fruits and vegetables that are exposed to the sun and air. We copy nature's effects by exposing food to warm air, a method that removes all the water that would otherwise lead to spoilage. Microorganisms need moisture to grow, so removing the water will stop the microorganisms from growing. Drying is a very ancient form of food preservation. Prehistoric people dried grains, fruits, and nuts in the sun. When fire was discovered, they learned to smoke meat and fish by the fireside. Native Americans dried and chopped meat, then mixed it with fat. The lack of moisture in the meat kept it from spoiling. Modern industrial science has perfected the techniques of drying and applied them to the mass production of a variety of foods, such as powdered eggs and milk, peas, mushrooms, coffee, soups, and salad dressings. Another method of food preservation is curing. Curing is done by adding ingredients such as salt, sugar, spices, or lemon juice. Curing is one of the oldest methods of food preservation and is still used in the production of many meats and fish. The ingredients used in curing have unique reactions with the food they're added to. For example, salt slows the growth of microorganisms and removes some of the water from the food. Sugar counteracts the hardening that's sometimes caused by salt. Lemon or lime juice added to raw fish will preserve the fish for a short time without removing all the moisture.
Using points and examples from the talk, explain how the 2 methods of food preservation keep food from spoiling. Writing section directions. The writing section measures your ability to use writing to communicate in an academic environment. There are 2 writing questions. Question 1 is an integrated writing task. You will read a passage, listen to a lecture, and then answer a question based on what you have read and heard. You have 20 minutes to plan and write your response. Question 2 is an independent writing task. You will answer a question based on your own knowledge and experience. You have 30 minutes to plan and write your response. Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in a philosophy class.
The philosophy of realism praises reason and logic, but ignores passion, emotion, and feeling. Critics of realism argue that if we want to really understand human beings in the world, we have to consider the total, the whole of human experience. But with all its emphasis on facts and reason and scientific methods, the philosophy of realism ignores the total human. An important belief of realism is that anything that exists can be measured scientifically. But is that true? Can we measure our passions and feelings scientifically? Can the methods of science really solve big human problems like poverty? Critics of realism say no, because the underlying psychological causes of poverty are very complex and cannot be reduced to mathematics. Bertrand Russell thought we could use the methods of science to achieve excellence in education. However, Russell also believed that students had to be measured against some objective, real criteria. Because of this view, students are compared to fixed standards, such as national examinations. So realism has led to an educational system that's based on standardized tests, like college entrance examinations and national tests for teachers. Many of our leaders praise the testing movement as scientific and fact-based, that is, based on realist philosophy. But critics of realism like to point out that the effects on students are negative. Standardized tests dehumanize people because they don't respect passion, emotion, and feeling, which are important parts of the total person. Today, the realist ideal of our technological society shows little respect for the unity of knowledge. Think about how scientists often work on one small part of a large project without understanding the whole. Someone who works only on one small part may not understand how the whole project affects humanity, and this might be dangerous to humanity. For example, it's possible for scientists to work on a project that is anti-human, against life. A project like biological weapons. They might work on one small part of a weapon system without even knowing it.
Summarize the points made in the lecture, explaining how they contradict points made in the reading.